بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا بالقاسم محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين وأصحابه المنتجبين أما بعد. Today starts a series of lectures, 3 lectures, 3 consecutive weeks on a particular theme which is going to deal with the spirituality of the Ahl-ul-Bayt. It's going to look at the concept of wilaya. But as today we start off, I'd like to thank the Muhammadi Trust for holding these events, as well as Dr. Tehrani's hard work. The format is going to be such that it's going to be slightly different from our conventional lectures which we have, because today's discussion is not going to be a theological one. It's going to be, as we discussed with Dr. Tehrani, that it's going to be more based upon spirituality. It's going to be on the reality of the Prophet, essentially, which we call within mysticism the haqiqat al-Muhammadiyya, the Muhammadian reality. So for those people who have come in for a theological discussion, today is not a theological discussion. What today will be, though, is we're going to look at different mystics throughout the Islamic history, starting off from as far back as Ibn Arabi and then working through Sayyid Haydar Amali, looking at, for example, within the subcontinent the likes of Sultan Bahu, and finishing off with Allama Tabatabai to look at what the reality is and what is this prophet that we revere so much. What is his reality? Why is it that today so many people, 1,400 of them, remember who the Prophet of God is? And I think it's very fitting that within the current climate we discuss the life of the Prophet, and so therefore I think that we'll break this session into 3 parts so it's digestible. The first is looking at the ontological reality of the Prophet, mystical cosmology. The second phase, I think, within the speech that we're going to look at is the Prophet himself, his reality in terms of creation. One is in terms of the metaphysical realities in God. Second is in terms of creation within itself. And thirdly, what lessons can we learn? Or essentially, what can we learn from the akhlaq of the Prophet? Because one thing that defines the Prophet is his akhlaq. And so what can we learn from this? That human beings have been designed or created to go towards the Creator. So essentially there's 2 movements which are taking place. One is a horizontal movement and one is a vertical movement towards our perfection. We perfect ourselves in a horizontal way, we perfect ourselves in a vertical way. That vertical perfection we call ma'rifah, irfan. It is that movement towards God through the ability to love. The power of love and ma'rifah, there's 2 things. That in the Hadith al-Qudsi it says when God created the universe, he said, Kuntu kanzal makhfiyya. It's a very famous tradition that I was a hidden treasure. فَأَحْبَبْتُ أَنْ أُعْرَفْ, and I loved to be known. So the Urafah have said that the entire dynamics of creation is this, that God is a hidden treasure, he's ghayb al-ghayub, he's veiled 70,000 levels of lightness and dark, black and white, veil around him, and that human beings are moving towards understanding that Creator. But there are 2 things within that dynamics that this tradition tells us. The one thing is that God loved to be known. 2 dynamics come forward. One is the ability of man to love as the mover, and the second is ma'rifah of Allah. Through the physical world, therefore, the act of creation, Allah says He created. There was an act of creation. From the movement of the act of creation, through the ability to love, to the level of understanding of the Creator. And that is the essential purpose of our existence. It synthesizes very well in some of the discussion that we have within Hinduism, and as Dr. Tehrani and I have been discussing in the last couple of weeks, that there is a movement within the Gita as well. If we look at the tradition of the Gita, that there are 3 levels of yoga, 3 levels of annihilation. The first one starts off with karma yoga, the ability of action. And from there it goes into Jnana Yoga, the idea of ma'rifah that we have within our traditions. And finally it ends with Bhakti Yoga, the idea of this divine reality of love, the love of God. And so you find this parallels between different types of traditions. But the tradition that we're looking at today is the tradition of Islam. And the very same 3 parallels are there when you analyze this tradition. God is a hidden treasure, the action of creation, He loved to be known. The purpose of that love is so that He's known. The purpose of that movement is that He's known. But what is that medium though that God creates? What is the act of creation itself? What is the being of creation itself? That God cannot be understood. I can't understand God, and you can't understand God without a medium. Why? Because God has stated He's a hidden treasure. To get to that treasure, to make that movement towards the divine, requires a medium. And so therefore this is where our journey begins in the next 45, 50 minutes or so. That what is that act of creation? The very first thing that God creates. God is between existence and non-existence. God is far beyond wujud and adami wujud. God is that reality that there is no reality other than Him. To understand Him is difficult, for to understand Him requires a form of manifestation. It requires a form of a container. God is absolute, so absolute cannot be understood until it waters down almost, until it comes through manifestation. So the very first thing that God creates, or in the tradition it says, the very first self-determination, the very first tayyun that comes into creation is that act of being, the act of existence. And as they say, God is that black nur that when light is shone in such a way, it blinds the intellect of man. And from that black nur comes a manifestation. And that first manifestation that brings into existence all of those things that exist is what they call the light of the Prophet, the haqiqat al-Muhammadiyah, or the nur of the Prophet of God. And this is where everything starts off from. From that very first manifestation, Allah creates in one go, kun fayakun, in one go, all of the realities of creation. From the essence itself. So just to explain that there are three levels we'll look at of God. The first is the essence of God, which is hidden. The second level is the level of the sifat, the characteristics of God and the names of God. And the third level is the action of God, the af'al of the Creator, is those actions that bring into play. This entire universe is an action of God. When the name, for example, Rabb, Lord, becomes manifest, it's a name, it's a character of God. When it becomes manifest, what happens? It creates the entire universe. The name within itself is a quality. When that quality comes into actualization is what produces the universe. And it's going to be like this the whole way through. We're going to have an in-depth discussion, philosophical and mystical discussion. So today I've been told don't water anything down. We're going to go for the whole hog. So bear with me, and hopefully afterwards we're going to have 10 or 15 minutes of question and answers as well. So that's the level that we're going to discuss. In fact, if you want, we can step it up a gear as well a bit later on. But here we are, within creation, within existence. God, the very first action of being is the light of the Prophet. What is the light of the Prophet? From the essence of Allah, the very first manifestation is His characteristics and His action. All of these names of action and characteristics can be broken down into two. On the one hand, Jalal, which is the majesty of Allah. On the other hand, Jamal. If you look at the 99 names, for example, you have Bahar, a Jalali name of God, is a majestic name. But if you look at, for example, Latif, it's something which is Jamali, it's something which is the names of beauty, it's something that doesn't have that aggression there. It's like what they say within, for example, Taoism, the idea of the yin and the yang. Both opposites have to come together. And the only place that you find the law of opposites coming together is within the Dhat of Allah, it's within the essence of God. Within creation itself, you find everything is opposing each other. Look at the forces of gravity, right? Pushes man down, for example. Friction is created. There's an entire law which is taking place. And if we had another half an hour, we'd go into the law of opposites. But the fact is that the entire creation in and of itself has been governed in such a way where you find that there's something which is known as the law of opposites. The only place where two opposites come together is the Dhat of Allah. And the only place in creation that two opposites come together is in the shape of Amir al-Mu'mineen, or the Prophet of God. We'll look at Amir al-Mu'mineen next week, but today we're looking at the Prophet of God, the greatest of all creation. If Amir al-Mu'mineen is Amir al-Mu'mineen, it's because of the Prophet of God. The very first act of creation, therefore, is to create the very first substance. That very first substance, the aql awwal, as they say, the very first intellect. Why is it the very first intellect? Why is it the very first? For example, if you look at the traditions, it says the first thing that Allah created was, for example, the tablet. In another tradition it says the first thing Allah created was the pen of existence, that from this pen all of creation was written. Another tradition says the very first thing Allah created was the divine intellect. In another tradition it says the very first thing Allah created was the nur of the Prophet. Take all of these traditions together and sum them all up. The very first thing Allah created was what? The haqiqat al-Muhammadiyah, the reality of the final Prophet. All of the the tablet, Arsh of Allah, the Kursi, Quran in and of itself, the Kalam of Allah. If you take the Nur that's been created, the first light, if you take all of these realities to one platform, all of them are different dimensions of the reality of the Prophet. So what is the Prophet then? Essentially the Prophet is this. Allah, when he manifested himself for the first time, what happened was that his names and his attributes were created. The entire universe is a scattering of his names and his attributes. Why? Because we come to understand God through these scatterings of names and attributes. Allah's Rahman, for example, all of creation goes back to Rahman. What is the purpose of Allah creating us? Because of divine mercy, ontological mercy. Why mercy? Because mercy is given to something. At the level of action and at the level of name, Allah wanted to give this mercy to something for the completion of these names. Therefore He created all of existence. To give you an example, you're a father in potentiality. Until you don't have children, that potential hasn't been completed. You're a grandfather in potentiality. Until you don't have grandchildren, it's not completed. You're a husband in potentiality. Until you don't get married, it's not completed. In the same way, the names of God contain the mercy of Allah. Until the completion doesn't come, until it's not given to something, it's not completed. Allah and His Dhat is complete, there's no discussion on that. But on the level of the names, until it's not given to something. So what is it that Allah created? He doesn't create multiply in terms of movement. He creates everything in one go. And the first thing that He created and the last thing that He created, Zahir and Batin. Awwal and Akhir, Zahir and Batin, the very absolute content that He created was the light of the Prophet, was the reality of the Prophet. And from this reality then all of creation come forward. From this reality everything that you see around you come forward. So really the question comes here. If Allah created the light of the Prophet in the first aspect, and in the Quran it says kun fayakun, He said be, and it was. Question is this then, why is it that in the Quran it states that Allah created in 6 parts? Is there a contradiction between one verse of the Quran that says He created in one go, and is there a contradiction between the fact that He created in 6 stages? You see, we say within our theology that Allah creates in one go, and He did. In one go He created the light of the Prophet. But one of the things that needs to be understood in here, we'll take reference within philosophy, that there are 3 levels of reality. In fact, there are much more than that, but we'll look at 3 levels. On the lowest level is the physical world that you live in. The characteristic of this physical world is defined by 2 things. You have form and you have matter. Matter is the physical matter that's in front of you. Had there been no form, it would be one blob of meat. But the fact is that there's form which has been given to this matter. And so therefore you found that there are people, 7 billion of us, with form. The fact is that we're material. The fact is that we're restricted. This is the only world essentially that is scattered in this way. Multiplicity that you have in this world. And so therefore there's a various laws which have been created in this world. Go one level higher than that, which the philosophers talk about, the mystics talk about, alam al-mithal, the world of forms. The world of forms, for example, to give you the best example is this. When you go to sleep at night time, in your dream, for example, you see that biryani, it's in front of you. Now you want to go and eat it, but you find it's not tangible, it's not physical. The pleasure may be there, but it doesn't fill you because it's not physical. And when you wake up in the morning, you want to have a heavy breakfast because of the dream that you saw. It's like I remember there was a teacher within Syria once in Damascus, and a person comes up to him and he says, look, I want to see God. He says, I want to see God. He says, you want to see God? You can't see God. He says, fine, I want to see the Prophet. He says, you want to see the Prophet? He says, come to me. He says, okay, sit down. Came and he sat down. He says, look, let me feed you some food, come empty. When you've eaten this food, when you go to sleep at time, you'll see what you want to see. He says, fine. He says, this thing that I'm going to give you, you will definitely see the Prophet of God. He says, fine. Comes down, sits down. He says, as he sat down, he started to eat the food. He realized the food is too salty. But he said, out of respect for my teacher, I'll finish the food which is very salty. He finished the food which was very salty. Straight after that, he was very thirsty. So that moment, the teacher says to him, he says, listen, you know what, you're not allowed to drink anything. But what I want you to do is I want you to go back home and sleep. Straight away, go to sleep. In the morning when you wake up, come to me. He says, fine. That night he went to sleep. As he woke up in the morning, thirsty as anything, comes to the teacher, says, look, I'm really thirsty, but I didn't see the Prophet. He says, what did you see? He says, all night I've been dreaming of water. Been dreaming of, for example, Evian. The whole night I've been Highland Spring. You know what the teacher replies to him? The teacher said, you know why? He says, why? Because you took yourself to the level of being thirsty. Had you taken yourself and cleaned your heart in such a way to that level that you had the thirst of the love of the Prophet, believe me, at night time you would have seen the Prophet as well. So the message is very simple for us. The idea is this: look, there's a level of thirst there. There's a level of movement there, to come back to our discussion. This world is a world of scattering. This world is a world of movement. It's the lowest level of existence. That level higher than that, alam al-mithal. That level has, for example, no physical matter, but it has form. And this is why you find that within a tradition, the sixth Imam alayhi salam says, he says, look, on the day of judgment you have our intercession, but we fear for you in barzakh. The reason being is this: because in barzakh is that place where your entire imagination goes wild. It's like sometimes you see your worst nightmares, right? For a person who's evil, their worst nightmare comes true with them when they're at that level of barzakh. The level higher than that, though, is a level which the philosophers call alam al-qul, is the world of the intellect. And at that world there's no form and there's no matter. Essentially what you're doing is, from a series of scatteredness, you are going back to a period of unity. You're going to that dot of unity. And so here's where the question is answered. Has the world been created in 6 parts, or kun fayakun? See, we say that all of the reality has been given to that light of the Prophet. From that light of the Prophet comes all of existence. How does it take shape? It takes shapes like this. Ibn Sina answers it very well. So somebody asked Ibn Sina, they said, look, how did God create the universe? And he gives the example of the apricot. He says, Ja'al Allahu mishmasha. He says, Allah created the apricot. It's not the fact that he created the color and the taste and the form and the shape. In one go he created it. And then after that, color, shape, form, everything else develops. He says, in the very same way, Allah created everything in one go, all of the realities. That movement itself is a reality, time itself is a reality. From Adam to Khatam, everything that's been created, even the trees that move, all of that reality Allah created in one go. He called it, or we call it, the universal intellect. But essentially that universal intellect is the Haqiqat al-Muhammadiyya, the very first medium. As that medium came through realities, it adopted the form of every reality that it came, until it comes down to the physical world. That 6th stage that we talk about within the Quran is the laws of the physical world. To take it forward, when Allama Tabatabai talks about the Mi'raj, somebody asked him a question. He said, tell me, is the Mi'raj physical or is the Mi'raj spiritual? He says that, look, you're a philosopher. If you say that the Mi'raj was physical, how can you explain the fact that when the Prophet gets to that reality, which is the world of light, for example, how is it possible that the physical body can stay in the world of light? There's no place for physics within the world of light. And he answers very beautifully. He says the ascension was physical. As the Prophet went through different realities, though, he took the form of those realities until he got to the level of light. And as he came back down again, he took the realities of all of those physical realms, or the spiritual realms, until he came back to the physical world. So he answers it very beautifully. He doesn't contradict our tradition that says that the ascension was physical. Yes, the Prophet went in, his ascension was physical. From the level of multiplicity, the Prophet rose to the level of unity. But as he went from world to world, for example, he took the shape and the body of that movement that took place. To give you an example, when you go into your grave, are you alive or are you dead? Technically speaking, you're alive. Why? Because your soul lives on. Why does your physical body have to die? Because you can't enter alam al-barzakh in physical body. Why? Because it's your soul that needs to enter it. And when you get to the final stages, let's say, when you go into realities and you get deeper into those realities, you cannot use the same form in those realities. So therefore you have to shred all of your existence, or your physical existences, to get to that higher level. And so in this way, what you see is that Allah created the world in one go, all of reality. As it comes down through existence, what happens is that this movement adopts the physical body, or the 6 stages that we talk about. So this movement of 6 stages essentially is what? Essentially is the scattering of the physical world. See, Allah created the whole universe in such a way that it's on that dot. And this is why, and we'll look at it next week, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, he says, look, I'm that dot under the bar. Why? Because the Quran's reality is the reality of all of creation. And that dot contains all of creation. When that dot is expanded, to use a scientific term, when the Big Bang takes place from the dot, then all of creation comes into play. Everything started off with the Prophet, everything will end with the Prophet. Everything started off with Amir al-Mu'mineen, everything will end with Amir al-Mu'mineen. All of creation and its realities is Amir al-Mu'mineen. all of creation and its realities according to Ibn Arabi is what? Is the Prophet of God, Amir al-Mu'mineen according to Ibn Arabi. Everything within creation started off and ends with that. Infinitely from one angle, infinitely from another angle. When you take all of that creation, there's only one reality. This is why within Shi'ism we say they are Hujjat of Allah. What is the Hujjat of Allah? Hujjat of Allah is that thing that encompasses all of reality, otherwise it would not be Hujjat of Allah. Hujjat of Allah can only be that entity that contains the reality of everything. Your reality, my reality, this microphone's reality, the camera's reality, every creation in existence, all of that reality is contained within one level, and that level is the level of the Prophet. And that's what Haqiqat Muhammadiyya is. Break it down further, I'm going to describe it further. What is Haqiqat Muhammadiyya? Haqiqat Muhammadiyya is this, is that barzakh, is that medium between God and creation. What is Haqiqat Muhammadiyya? Haqiqat Muhammadiyya essentially is this, on the one angle takes us towards rububiyyah, on the other angle takes us towards ubudiyyah. On the one angle it takes us towards lordship over creation, on the other angle it takes us towards becoming a true slave of Allah. Haqiqat Muhammadiyya, when it's actualized, has two stages to it. When you look towards creation, the Prophet is master, Rabb over all of creation. Now, I don't want to go into a discussion as to exactly what this meaning is, because as you know, when some of our friends who are within our centers, we talk about this concept of Rabb. Can Ali be Rabb? Can Muhammad be Rabb? That's another discussion for another day. The fact is that because this is a philosophical discussion, Prophet becomes the Rabb over all of creation as reality. On the one hand, he's Lord over all of creation. On the other hand, he's the perfect slave towards Allah. And that is the reality of the Prophet. What else is the reality? It's that medium, right? It's the barzakh. On the one hand is lordship. On one hand is perfect servitude. Haqiqat Muhammadiyya therefore is this. It's that medium that Allah communicates with us. It's that final hijab between us and Allah. Within Haqiqat Muhammadiyya is Haqiqat Alawiyya. Within Haqiqat Muhammadiyya is Haqiqat Fatimiyya. Within Haqiqat Muhammadiyya rests the realities of the 12 infallibles, but rests the reality of 124,000 prophets. Everything is from that reality. The reality of Jibreel is found within the Haqiqat Muhammadiyya. From that Haqiqat Muhammadiyya, therefore, scatters the entire universe. All of the universe is created from there. Haqiqat Muhammadiyya is within potentiality. The difference is this. Haqiqat Muhammadiyya is potential. Insan Kamil, the perfect man, is actualization. One is Bil-Quwa. Bil-Quwa is what? Bil-Quwa in potentiality is the Haqiqat Muhammadiyya. Actualized, when it becomes actualized, it becomes the perfect man. Al-Insan al-Kamil. Who is the perfect man? The perfect man is what? The perfect man is the Prophet when he manifests himself in this world. What is the perfect man therefore? The existence of a perfect man in any time is important. Why? Because the perfect man is the ruh. He's the soul of creation. If the perfect man is to be taken out, it's like your soul being taken out of your body, you die. Give you an example. Example is this. You're moving your eyes. You're moving your hands. You're moving your feet. You can move all of these simultaneously. Why? Because your soul is in control of everything. If your soul was to be taken out, you wouldn't be able to move anything. In the same way, a leaf doesn't move from its place without the permission of the Prophet of God. Why? Because the Prophet is the soul of the universe. To take it down to even further levels, this world does not move from one place to another without the permission of the Hujjat of Allah, who is the 12th Imam alayhi salam. And this is in sync. If you go to Futuhat in Makkah, you'll see Ibn Arabi talks about this as well. He says that the Imam is the Hujjat of Allah. For those people who may think that Sunnis don't believe in the 12th Imam, no, Sunnis believe in the 12th Imam. Ibn Arabi believes in a living 12th Imam who he calls the Mahdi, or in his own language he calls Al-Insan al-Kamil. It's the perfect man. The perfect man must live in this world. Had the perfect man been taken away, the world will be destroyed. Go back to our own traditions. Look at Rasul al-Kafi, for example. If there was one day remaining, right? Or for example, the other tradition, if there were two people left, one of them would be the Hujjat of Allah. If the Hujjat of Allah is removed, the entire world desecrates, destroys itself. ceases to exist. Hujjat of Allah needs to be there. Hujjat is the soul of Allah. To break it down further, what is the Hujjat of Allah? Hujjat of Allah, if I was to explain it in very easy terms, is this. If the entire universe is a scattering of names and attributes of God, so for example, when all of those names were actualized, from potentiality to actuality, when all of the universe was actualized, you see it around you, scatterings of names and attributes. When you take all of these names together to one locus, you have 99 names of God. I'll simplify it. You have 99 names of God. If you ever look at a chart, you'll see that the 99 names are surrounding one name. What is that name? The name is Allah. What is the name Allah? Allah's Ism Jam is the name that takes all of the names onto one locus. What is Muhammad therefore? He is that locus that brings all of creation onto one place, one plane. And so therefore when Allah creates the entire universe and He scatters the entire universe, the polish or the perfection of the entire universe rests in Al-Insan al-Kamil. We call him Adam. The reality of Adam though, look at it and see, look. Surah Baqarah is there, right? We're going to the Quran. What does Allah say? He says that I'm putting a Khalifa on this world. Inni ja'alun fil ard al-Khalifa. Khalifa on this world. Who is this Khalifa? This Khalifa is what? Allah's Khalifa. Khalf comes from left behind. What is this Khalifa? This Khalifa is the absolute manifestation, the greatest manifestation of the names and the attributes of God. Contains all of creation. Allah continues to produce. His existence is such that continuously is in the act of creation. This act of creation therefore tells us something. If He's continuously creating, then therefore He's not talking about the metaphysical realities here. He's talking about the physical world. Why? Because only in the physical world do you find motion. This continuous act of creation is a continuous movement. That continuous movement's reality is found in the Prophet. So therefore, what are we saying? We're saying this, that all of creation in a scatteredness, when you bring all of them onto one platform, equals a Khalifatullah. The Khalifatullah is Adam. Allah says to the angels, what does He say? When I create him and I blow into him, وَنَفَقْتَ فِيهِمْ مِنْ رُوحِي, a part of my ruh, then all of you go into prostration. Why? Adam is what? Look at the tradition. Allah created Adam. In what way? Some of our traditions in Bihar say this. Angels sculpted Adam. So Allah is asking the angels to bow down to something that they sculpted? No, there's a greater reality. That reality is that breath that He blows into Adam. By the blowing of breath into Adam, Adam becomes Lord over all of creation. What is that breath that He blows? What is that ruh from Him that He blows into Adam? Is the very first medium, the Haqiqat-e-Muhammadiyya. When the Haqiqat-e-Muhammadiyya goes into Adam and is actualized, it produces the perfect man. That perfect man therefore is so powerful that when Allah blows, all of the angels then come and bow down to that perfect man. Why? Because Allah teaches that perfect man the kalamat. What is this kalama that He teaches him? These are the words of existence that He teaches him. These are the words of creation that He teaches him. This is what differentiates Adam from all of existence. To break it down into another tradition that we have, there are 72 words of knowledge. It's different from the 73. 72 words of knowledge. 2 of them are existing in this world from the time of Adam to Khatam, and the world is advanced in the way that it has. Since when the 12th Imam comes, he'll bring the remaining 70 letters of knowledge and he'll put that knowledge in front of the people. Such will be that knowledge, the tradition says, that when the letter is written on the hand of man, when man puts it over the head of someone who's ill, that person will recover from illnesses. But that's a discussion for a different day, which deals with the Hujjat of Allah in the form of the 12th Imam alayhi salam when he comes. The idea is this though, Allah teaches Adam the words, and these words are the words of existence. When He teaches the words of existence, when the reality of the Prophet then actualizes within Adam, the hukum is given. Bow down. All of the angels bow down. What does he become? He becomes Lord over all of creations. Man's maqam therefore, man's ability is to become Lord over creation. Why and when? When he understands truly what his servitude in front of Allah is. When man becomes truly a servant, only then he becomes Lord. To break it down further, when man truly understands his poverty, fakhr, what does the Prophet say? He says, I am the greatest pauper in front of Allah. To understand your poverty. Ontological poverty means this, that for 1 second you should not believe that you have any power but Allah. For 1 second. It's like that tradition of the fourth Imam al-Islam where he says, Allah, don't make me ghafil, don't make me slumber in such a way that when I breathe in, I feel I'm going to breathe out again. Even the breath that I take in, I should understand my servitude in front of you. I should understand the fact that I'm a slave. Here the Prophet of God says, he says, I'm the greatest slave. I'm the greatest slave. I can't lift a hand up without God. I can't breathe without. Everything that you have is from God. Therefore the perfect man and the actualization of the Haqiqat al-Muhammadiyya rests in the fact that you're a true servant. Servitude means what? Destruction of the human ego, destruction of arrogance. The first thing therefore that Allah breathed over creation, the first thing Allah breathed over His names that produces all of creation and existence in front of you is what? It's known as the Nafs Rahmani. His breath of mercy, this Rahman, right? Now take it forward. What does the Quran says? Quran says this, Inna nafs la ammarat bisu illa ma rahma rabbi. Mercy of Allah needs to be there for man to be able to destroy the ego, for man to stop himself or herself from going towards su. From destruction requires the mercy of Allah, the rahmah of Allah. Now break it down further. Third dimension. The mercy of Allah can only be attained through one reality. What is that reality? Go and look at the Quran. Quran says what? Who is the Prophet? Rahmatul lil Alameen. He's a mercy over existence. Of all of existence, over creation. So therefore it requires this. That connection with Rahmatul lil Alameen is necessary for the destruction of the human ego and the actualization of your own perfection. To become a true servant, there's a medium which is required. Today when people say, can we go directly to God? God hasn't created the world to go directly towards Him. Had He created you to go directly towards Him, He would have created you angelic. There would not have been a barrier there. The fact that Allah's created you physical tells you that it requires a barrier. You're in a physical body. That in itself is a wasila in and of itself. Since Allah says in the Quran, come to me with a wasila. The greatest wasila therefore is the wasila of the Prophet. Allah would not have created you in the physical world like this had He created you for you to directly go to Him. But why is this? Why is this? The reason being is this. Are we not greater than the angels? Why is it that the angels are at maqam al-qurb, maqam al-indiyat? Why are they so close to Allah? Why is there no medium? No, there's a medium there as well. The medium between the angels and Allah is known as Nur. And the greatest manifestation of Nur is the Haqiqat al-Muhammadiyya. Not even the angels can attain Allah without that manifestation. Why? To go back to the mystical tradition, because Allah's labeled you. Had you access to God, you'd cease to exist. Had you access to the Dhat of Allah, you'd cease to exist. Why? You'd burn. You'd destroy yourself. You couldn't come into existence. This is why Allah manifested from His Dhat. This manifestation needs to take place before the manifestation of creation. Because without that, Allah lies at a level which is not existence, which is not non-existence. You're existing. You can't get to the level which is beyond existence and non-existence. Because for us it doesn't lie anywhere. Either you're non-existent or you're existent. There's no middle ground there. So in this way, that reality that necessitates for us to understand the Creator is a reality of the Prophet. To go back to one of our traditions, the tradition says this, and it's a very famous tradition. 1100 years ago there was a book which was written by Sheikh Qummi, Basairat al-Darajat. It's one of the old books, in fact 1200 years ago. It even goes further back than Kafi does. In that tradition it says this. It says that Amir al-Mu'mineen comes to the Prophet of God, and when he comes to the Prophet of God he says, who is greater, us or the angels? And at that moment the Prophet then replies and says, Ali, do you remember when Allah created our light? From our light, summarizing the tradition, from our light He created the light of the angels. When the angels were created, when they looked at our majesty and our beauty, they came towards us. As they came towards us, we said Allahu Akbar, and they said Allahu Akbar. Again they came towards us. Again, when they saw our beauty and our majesty, at that moment we said, La ilaha illallah. The angels then replied, La ilaha illallah. And in this way, the Prophet then continues. The summary was this: Ali, we taught the angels Tawheed. Had we not been there, the angels would never have understood Tawheed. Why? Because to understand something, you require a medium. Today you're listening. Through what? Through your ears, medium. I'm talking. Through what? My tongue. What's working? My intellect should be working. Don't know if it is, but it should be working. If any information I've got, where have I got it from? From, let's say, teachers, books. Those books were written by someone. Medium, everything goes back to a medium. The angels, to understand Allah and Tawheed, required a medium. That medium had to be so bright that Jibreel says, Rasulullah, if I go further in the fourth heavens, I'll burn. But Jibreel, you're made of light. How is it possible you'll burn? Says, no, there's a reality far greater than light, and that reality is known as Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. It's like Rumi says, right? And as we're having a discussion now, whether Rumi is right or wrong, remember this is our discussion for everyone, and there's people from all different sects here and denominations. Rumi writes a parable. He says that the last time that Jibreel comes to the Prophet of God, at that moment, he said, Prophet of God looks towards Jibreel. He says, Jibreel, show me your final manifestation, show me your perfection. So Rumi says that the Prophet of God standing there, and Jibreel shows him his final perfection. Says the Prophet of God falls to the ground. There was a lot of light there. But at that stage, Rumi asks a question. He says the Prophet of God did fall to the ground because that manifestation of light was so powerful. So he says but one thing. He says, but Jibreel never asked the Prophet, show me your final manifestation. Said, had Jibreel asked the Prophet, then here he recites a line, and I'm going to recite it in the way that it's written. He says, Ta abad madhush mana Jibreel. Says, to summarize, that Jibreel would never have got up again. He would have remained passed out. Why? Because the power of the light of the Prophet is such, it would have disintegrated Jibreel. Says, well, Rumi writes in the final parable, to take it back to the Mi'raj. That Mi'raj, the Prophet of God is going up there on the fourth level of heaven. At that stage, Jibreel says, Rasulullah, I can't go any further. Had I gone further, I would have. What is that reality that can go further? That reality is this, that in the words of Rumi, a hand comes out, and he shakes that hand. When he comes back to the physical world again, he says to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali Awan and the Mi'raj, Amir al-Mu'mineen replies, shall I tell you everything that happened up there? There's only one reality. That reality is in sync. No one can understand the Prophet but through the door of Wilaya. And we'll have a comprehensive discussion next week on what the Wilaya of Amir al-Mu'mineen is. There's a tradition in Bukhari that I want to narrate while we're here. It says that when Allah wishes khair for someone, He gives him something. Tafaqquhu fi ad-din. It's a tradition that says when Allah wants good for someone, He gives him profound knowledge within the religion. Now, our fuqaha narrate this, Sunni and Shi'a both. But I always say to the ulama, fuqaha, why don't you complete what the tradition is? That's only half of the tradition. You know the other half says? The Prophet of God says, when Allah wishes khair for someone, good for someone, He gives them profound knowledge in the religion. And then the Prophet then continues. He says, but this profound knowledge comes from where? He says, this profound knowledge comes only from one door. Innama ana qasimun wallahu yu'ti. He says, Allah is the one who gives it, but I am the only one who distributes it. To be able to understand truly knowledge, to truly understand the knowledge of God, to truly understand divine knowledge, the only door that you can go is through the door of the Prophet of God. And here the Prophet of God says, Ana madinatul ilm wa aliyun babuha. To understand the door of the Prophet, you've got to go to the door of Najaf, and you've got to sit on the door of Amir al-Mu'mineen to get that knowledge. Everything is linked. To get to Amir al-Mu'mineen, you've got to understand another reality. You know what that reality is? The reality is this. Salman is on the 10th level of Iman. Do you know how he got to the 10th level of Iman? Look at the tradition. his khalwa that he used to sit down alone with the Prophet of God. And I can see that there are people here from the Sufi traditions as well. What is khalwa? Khalwa is when you go down, you go to a separate location, for example, you cut yourself from the world for a period of time, you go into your own, you sit there and you meditate. It says khalwa, right? This idea, and it's on different levels. Khalwa can be walking through a group of people that your heart is away from the people, but essentially it's a spiritual exercise. For example, at night time when you sit in your room, you close your door, you're there contemplating between you and God. And I've really watered it down here. It means something else essentially. When your teacher says go for 40 days for khalwa, or 3 days for khalwa, or 10 days for khalwa. Salman got to the highest level, 10th level of Imam through khalwa. Look at the tradition. Somebody asked him, says, Salman, what would you do in khalwa? He says, I would sit with the Prophet of God alone, and the Prophet of God would give to me secret knowledge, divine knowledge. Then he asked the question. He said, what is this divine knowledge? Surely the door is Ali, and surely the reality is the Prophet. What is this divine knowledge that the Prophet gave you that took you to the 10th level of Iman? He replies, that divine knowledge was the secret which is found within Fatima to Zahra, and inshallah we'll look at it in the third lecture. He says, I couldn't get to any reality without understanding truly who Zahra is. So here that chain is made. Salman getting to the 10th level, he has to get through the daughter of the Prophet. Then he has to knock on the door of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And then he gets inside of the city of knowledge. From that city of knowledge is that vertical movement from love to ma'rifah towards Allah. So essentially wilaya. Wilaya is divine love on one angle. From this divine love comes true understanding of the Prophet. The Prophet of God himself has two realities. One reality is his lordship over creation. One reality is what? His servitude towards Allah. Break it down further. Perfect man is that person who one eye is physical, one eye is metaphysical. One eye is mulk, one eye is malakut. One eye is in one realm, one eye is in the other realm. Break it down. One reality within the metaphysical realm, one reality within the physical realm. Is the Prophet dead, as some people say? He was gone. Had he gone in such a way, today the world would have gone. His reality is necessary to be in both realms. If his reality created the universe, he lives on for as long as the physical and the metaphysical worlds live on. And that means that he will continue to live infinitely. For as long as Allah is Lord, the Prophet of God's reality will continue to exist. And the Prophet of God's reality existed infinitely, and it will continue to exist infinitely. That is the haqiqat al-Muhammadiyya then. Now I'm going to take it to another dimension. And the other dimension is this. I know it's complex. Blame Dr. Tehrani. Going to break it down further. Ibn Arabi in this discussion goes on Fusus al-Hikam. There's a number of debates he brings forward. One of them is in relation to the permanent archetypes. Call it Ayna Thabita, Ayna Thabita. Those permanent archetypes are what? To understand now this reality. See, Allah, when He created the universe, He created these permanent archetypes. That permanent archetypes is that medium that the world is created from. You have a permanent archetype somewhere. Your perfection lies somewhere. That perfection has never smelt the reality of physical existence. But it lies in the intellect of God. It lies in the first intellect. That intellect holds your perfection, holds your quiddity, but at the same time it also holds your personal reality as well. All of these realities, when they're brought together on one locus, is the reality of the Prophet. So even your perfection is in a place. My perfection is in a place. On the one hand is my quiddity and the quiddity of insan. On the other hand is the huwi of insan, is that essential reality of man. When you bring all of these realities to one level, is the haqiqat al-Muhammadiyya. For those people who have studied philosophy, they'll understand that better. To understand to define quiddity and huwiyat now, mahiyan and huwiyat is going to take me another 45 minutes, so I'm not going to touch that. But for those people who have studied bidayah, they'll know exactly what we're looking at when we talk about quiddity and when we talk about for example, the huwiyah, this essential reality of man. Therefore, this is the Prophet. 124,000 prophets then come. After those 124,000 prophets, you find that the final prophet comes. Tabatabai says that the final prophet is the sum of all of existence. Is the sum of all of the prophets. Every prophet is a reflection of God. Adam is a reflection of God. Adam is what? Wali. Wali is the name of God. Nuh is the Jalal of Allah. It's quality of God. Musa, Jalal. Isa, Jamal of Allah. All of these things are qualities, the signs of God. If you take all of those qualities onto one locus, it's the final prophet. The final prophet, therefore, is the perfection within creation that brings all of the prophets. That final prophet is the perfect man, absolute manifestation. Why is it important for the prophet to come right at the end? Because there's a sunnah of Allah. The sunnah goes like this. When Allah created the whole universe, the final polish was the perfect man. In the same way, when Allah put forward all of the prophets, the polish, the seal, has to be the final. Why? Because he brings together everything, gels it all together. That gel needs to be there. So the question that people ask, did the dinosaurs come first or did man come first? And the answer is, we don't dispute the fact that the dinosaurs were there. We're not saying that man was the first in creation. Adam was the first man. He was the first creation. By default, Adam had to be the final in all of creation for him to be the polish, to bring everything together, the gel. And that gel is something which is important. So, as I bring the first section to a close, the first section was this. The first section is the reality of the Prophet. That reality is that reality that created all of creation. That reality is important for us to understand. That reality is the haqiqat al-Muhammadiyya. Actualized is the hujjat of Allah. Actualized is the final Prophet. Actualized is the reality of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Actualized is the 12th Imam. But what does it mean to us? Second and third stage. Now to cover second and third part. What is the relationship that the Prophet of God has in the physical world, and what is the relationship to us? Third point, as you may remember to go back, is the akhlaq of the Prophet and how we can implement it. There are two parts of the relationship of the Prophet with the physical world. Two parts go like this. Two parts, one part in Mecca, one part in Medina. The part within Mecca, 13 years. The part within Medina, 10 years. What is the Prophet? How does the Prophet defined? The question which always is raised is this, that why is it if the Prophet is the greatest of all of existence, did the Prophet become a prophet at the age of 40? Yahya, 6 months. Isa, speaking from the cradle. Musa, for example, 33. Joseph, again, 33. Yaqub, why is it then that the Prophet of God comes at the age of 40 as the Prophet, or declared openly as the Prophet? The answer is very simple. The answer comes here. You see, all of the prophets, their realities are this. Now to take comfort with theology. Theology says this, that the purpose of a prophet is twofold. One is essentially to take you towards God, and secondly is to solve your issues. I've really watered it down. What does it mean? He has a social responsibility, he has a spiritual responsibility. Social responsibility is to his flock, which are us. Spiritual responsibility is to teach us ways of getting to God, i.e. vertical perfection to take us to God, horizontal perfection in terms of society. If you go back to the Abrahamic faiths, Ibrahim comes forward with what? Ibrahim teaches us Tawheed, and that's it. Musa teaches us what? Musa emancipates a nation from slavery. After removing that nation from Fir'aun, the very first thing he teaches his nation are 10 commandments, are parameters. That tells us that human beings, the first thing which they require is Tawheed. Bani Israel are following your God. Second thing which is important are parameters. Without parameters you cannot exist. If you don't have Sharia, you cannot have anything else. The spiritual journey or nothing at all has any benefit to you until you don't have Sharia. Musa teaches his people Sharia. Isa comes forward and teaches his people mysticism, spirituality. Spirituality is what you guys call tariqat, is the Sharia has been taught by Moses. It's that movement, Tawheed, then Sharia, then tariqah. What is the haqiqah that the Prophet is trying to teach us? I can ask a question to the Prophet. I can say, look, everything has been taught there. Tawheed is there. Asl-ud-Din is there, Usul-ud-Din is there, Sharia is there, mysticism is there, spirituality is there. Rasulullah, why did you come forward? Prophet answers it very beautifully. You know what he says? The purpose of him coming forward is to perfect, you know the tradition, to perfect our akhlaq, makarim al-akhlaq, right? Why? Because human beings' perfection lies in their intellect. Haywan al-natiq, your rational animal. Your rational faculty is the greatest faculty that takes you towards perfection. The perfection of the rational faculty lies in your akhlaq. The Prophet has come forward to perfect your akhlaq. Therefore his reality in the physical world on us is to perfect. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi tahirin.